Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, with chief focus, of course, on the latest developments up north in Lebanon, as well as the tensions of prospects for miscalculation that may then draw Israel into yet another high-intensity conflict, it's always important to remember how the war began. 349 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas terror group, alongside its affiliates in the Gaza Strip, launched a surprise onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The next day, on October 8th of last year, Iran essentially joined this war by greenlighting its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since then, more than 6,000 projectiles have been fired by this Iranian proxy towards Israeli territory, and not only by Hezbollah, but also by the Houthis in Yemen, by Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, as well as other Shiite militias in Syria, including Iran proper, when it launched over 300 projectiles towards Israel on the night between the 13th and 14th of April earlier this year. Let's now turn to central Israel, where we're joined by the former head of Israel's Mossad Intelligence Directorate, namely Brigadier General in Reserve Amnon Sofrin. It's good to see you, General. Your organization is alleged to have been, I don't want to say naughty, but has been very efficient in its activities in Israel's northern neighbor, namely a foreign terrorist organization designated as such by the United States, Canada, Britain, and many other Western countries. This country, as I noted earlier, has launched roughly 7,000 projectiles towards Israel. And is Israel now on the offensive?
First of all, let me say that we don't admit that Israel is beyond this attack. That's first. Second, of course, we're what they call the first one to be blamed on that attack, because we have the ability, we have the knowledge, and we have the courage to carry out such an activity. But I'm not sure that you can define it as an attack, because this is sometimes kind of one part or one step of what we call a concealed war, or a silent war between Israel and between Hezbollah. This came over while, except from what is going on a daily basis, that they launch rockets and missiles and UAVs into Israel, and we attack on the south, on the Lebanese side of the border. But nevertheless, they try to hit a senior officer, a retired officer within the IDF, namely General Ya'alon, the former Chief of General Staff and Defense Minister, in return for what they are being blamed, of course, and this one, we took responsibility on killing Fuad Shukr, who was the head of the military wing of Hezbollah. And they now try to look out and see what happens and try to understand, even though we didn't carry out another physical attack on Hezbollah, but this was a big clue about our capabilities, of course, assuming that we are the one who carried out this operation. And this is a great message to the Hezbollah that they are vulnerable, and we know everything that is going on within this organization, and we can hit everyone anyway, anywhere, and anytime.
Indeed. Beyond, of course, the disarray that this impacted Hezbollah, the fact that its communication systems, all of them, are being targeted one after the other, unable to really collect itself in the short to medium term, and forcing it to recalibrate its thoughts on its activities versus Israel. It is impressive beyond reason of a doubt. Nevertheless, this was also identified as a cyber attack something that many have not witnessed in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, despite Russia having been one of the most potent cyber forces in the world. And therefore, I'd like to turn now elsewhere, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff, as well as Israeli Air Force Commander and other pilot and so on and so forth. I won't go into your entire curriculum vitae, but nonetheless, it's great to see you, Yaron. I'd like to ask you to expand on this capabilities that may have been indeed Israeli, of course, alleged to be Israeli by the enemy. Nonetheless, as General Sofrin mentioned, not taken responsibility for. It is the tip of the iceberg, obviously, for what the IDF and Israel's defense establishment has in store for its enemies. And therefore, what should Israel, on the one hand, do to avoid unveiling all of its cards, but on the other hand, also taking into account what IDF Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Hilzi Halevi, mentioned during a situational assessment at Northern Command with Major General Ori Goldin, in which he highlighted that every stage moving forward, higher prices will be exacted from Hezbollah.
So I think that we need to look at what we've seen. It's very interesting events unfolding in the north. First of all, on the highest level, we're nearing the 1-year mark of the war. And we still have hostages. We still have Gaza. We still have hostages. But in the last few weeks, it was declared that the center of gravity and the center of attention of the war cabinet is moving to the north. And then we saw what happened in the last few days. I think there's a connection here, of course, and the declaration of declaring the actual declaration that the attention is moving to the north, and the war cabinet declaring a goal to return the civilians back to their homes as part of the war aims is an important event by itself. The attack we've seen in the last few days is actually a supply chain attack. It's even on a higher level, it's a command and control attack that was pre-planned. Let's call it in a name that is sometimes used. It's a red button that was pre-planned in a very, very long-term planning from various aspects. The hardware, supplying it, making sure that there's deniability, all these things, all these James Bond things that aim to achieving this capability to have the capacity to press a red button and affect the other side's command and control in such a overwhelming way. And I think it might be still perceived under the threshold of war. This kind of red button can be part of an opening attack of an all-out war before more physical attacks. It is a physical attack because things exploded and people lost their lives and got severely injured in various parts of Hezbollah. I mean, the disarray in the organization, I could just imagine, is overwhelming. So it shows the goal of such an attack is to show the other side, first of all, to inflict this disarray, and then so the other side's perception of its penetrability is that is a huge thing. So the Hezbollah now has this feeling that, and the things are flying around in the social media, like they can't press a button, they can't press the toaster, they can't go on a weight measure, they can't put their hand on the, open the door. Everything is now a suspect of being planted with a small bomb. And that is a very, very effective way to tell the other side. And that goes to what you mentioned at the end of your question. So this is a classic move a coercive move that aims to tell the other side, stop here, because if you continue, this will get only worse. Now, the last three things I want to mention quickly is, one, the risks and the opportunity of using this red button. It was mentioned in open sources that using this button is highly risky for various reasons. You might use it when you open the war. Now, the diminishing effect of such an attack is quite understandable. I mean, in a month from now, this attack will be behind us, and you used this very sophisticated attack to reach what end? What's the goal of this thing? So the way you connect this tactical strategic attack to the strategic level and goals of the war is very important. And the last thing is the risks to other operations in other fronts, which we should consider and think about.
Indeed. Well, 2 points. There is a state of array, as I mentioned, and you just mentioned. This effect is short to medium term. Therefore, once you reach that medium term, Hezbollah will be recalibrated, and the social construct of the way Hezbollah is built, it's reliant on the Shiite communities, on the clans within that community, and those communities are just living their daily lives. They have a beeper, they receive that response of, we need you now, and then they rapidly transform from a social construct on the defensive end to an offensive organization, and therefore this, of course, has a ripple effect that will raise a lot of questions for the future, but nonetheless, this must be exploited for military means or diplomatic means. Of course, there are two angles to this, and as I noted, this is merely the tip of the iceberg. But I'd like to turn to elsewhere here in Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Radik Shafir, formerly an Israeli Air Force commander, fighter pilot, and again, I will stop at that. It's good to see you, General. While the second attack, since there were two waves of attacks, the first one was against the pagers, the second one was against walkie-talkies, again, alleged to be conducted by Israel. On the first day, there were strikes also in Syria against Shiite militias, and on the second day, when the walkie-talkies were struck simultaneously, suddenly there were strikes against Hashd Shabi in Iraq, in Mosul, and to be exact, something that, of course, was not necessarily attributed to Israel. Nonetheless, when the first wave of attacks occurred in Lebanon, Hashd Shabi launched two separate drones. The first one was intercepted by the Jordanians once it entered Jordanian airspace, and the second one was intercepted by the Israeli Air Force. Are we expected to see a broadening of the conflict in the event that the Americans fail to constrain Israel, as they publicly admit to be trying to do?
I think Israel will restrain itself and not act before November 5th. For that matter, it really depends on the presidential election and the outcomes in the Senate and Congress. But Israel does not want to be in a position where it is seen as obstructing or interfering with the elections. We've waited for 11 months to upend the Hezbollah actions in the north, and we can hold on for another month and a half. We can see from last week an uptick of Israeli actions in Syria and in Lebanon, in the Baalbek area, in Syria, against the Syrian Center for Upgrading Missile Accuracy. It was taken out allegedly through international sources by attack by airplanes and helicopter-ridden commandos. So perhaps the pager attack, with the supposition that it is connected to Israel, is part and parcel of the uptick of the war against Hezbollah, and not just a preemptive action towards a an attack on the ground. I think it is quite clear to most Israelis that the inhabitants will not go back to the north unless the Radwan forces and Hezbollah is pushed up to the Litani River. This will probably be done with ground troops, and that is why one of the commando brigades was called up north, and the Air Force. So I think it is an inching towards a threat to Lebanon that this is going to take place, and let Hezbollah come to terms one way or another before Israel is forced to oust them of South Lebanon. Another way is that Israel can declare that it ended the war in Gaza for all practical purposes, which it has, by the way, and then put all the pressure on Hezbollah to stop. But Israeli inhabitants will not go back home due to some diplomatic measures. So I think it is a preparation for an upcoming war around the second part of November.
Indeed. General Sofrin, I'd like to hear your take on this, but also beyond that, when we're looking at the broad scheme of American diplomacy right now, we heard last night or overnight retired Rear Admiral John Kirby, the National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, coming out and highlighting that they don't know yet what those operations in Lebanon may yield from a offensive or defensive perspective on Hezbollah's part, but nonetheless they are continuing to do everything in their power to reach a cessation of hostilities for the Gaza Strip. Do you see that interfering in any way in Hamas's calculus, understanding full well that Israel has the qualitative edge on its department, also vis-a-vis Hezbollah in Lebanon, in a time when it is reallocating its funds to identify the various pressure points that it needs to push?
I don't think that Hamas is influenced or taking into consideration what happened in Lebanon. It may weaken somehow the position of Hamas, because Hamas hoped that Hezbollah will join the war with full capacity and engage Israel on the other side of the border. And that means that it will ease the pressure in Gaza, on Hamas in Gaza Strip, of course. And they expected from the beginning of this war, from October 7, 2023, they expected all the proxies to join together, all together in this kind of war, and actually carry out some war of attrition on Israel to make it bleed, just like the Iranian ideology. Now, when Mr. Sinwar in his big tunnel or wherever he's hiding post looks at what happens on Hezbollah, he says, okay, this is some kind of what they call a damage, but it's not something that is terminal. That means Hezbollah is not defeated. Hezbollah can hit back. It will recover. And just like Yaron said before, within a month, everybody will forget what happened on these days, that everybody is excited and everybody is looking and admiring what happened in Lebanon, the capabilities of Israel, which looks like some imagery fairy tale that was being implemented by, of course, alleged by us. But it doesn't really weaken Hezbollah on the strategic level. That means that Hezbollah can recover, can launch missiles and rockets into Israel and UAVs and whatever to every point in Israel, actually. Not only on the northern border, but even at the central and even the southern part of the border. And Hezbollah and Hamas is still hoping, and Sinwar is still hoping that it will happen, and they will join the war somehow. But nevertheless, it doesn't really say that this is a provision. That means I'm going to carry on fighting until I get the kind of deal that I want, meaning that I will release all the people that have been abducted on October 7, but in exchange, I want a ceasefire. I want you out of Gaza. And I want what we call a Palestinian government, a mutual Palestinian government, which with Hamas will be part of that as well. So I don't see that is really affected from what happened in Lebanon right now.
Indeed. Well, General Rosen, on the one hand, we're hearing Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman coming out and speaking to his government, to his people, and announcing that there will be no normalization between Riyadh and Jerusalem unless a Palestinian state is erected, something that, of course, has ramifications to Washington's grand strategy, at least under the previous administration, of expanding the Abraham Accords, with Saudi Arabia being the crown jewel, so to speak, of that development that would then serve as a counter to Iranian efforts to bolster its own influence in neighboring countries and countries also beyond on the third circle and fourth circle. And of course, with the vigorous attempts by Tehran in concert with Russia, China, and others to diminish Washington's influence not only in the region but beyond.
Yeah, it's sad. It's really sad to say that when there's no strategic plan, long-term strategic plan, we're moving from one tactical story to another. It's just saddening to see how this is managed on the strategic level. And basically, as you've said, the Abrahamic Accords and the building of the counter crescent, the Sunni moderate crescent with Israel to counter Iranian aggression in the region is a strategic goal that Israel and the United States and the West should pursue. And all these things that push the Crown Prince to declare such a declaration are just they just show how this thing is unmanaged in so many ways. And it's just saddening, because part of how diplomacy and war are supposed to be conducted is the creation of momentums throughout action. So the war in Gaza should have a goal to restructure Gaza's future and the future of Gaza next to Israel. The war in Gaza should have shaped also the wider concept of Israel's final borders. The war in Gaza should have created a momentum to deal with the problem of the Iranian aggression all around Israel vis-a-vis Hezbollah. But when you don't have this all-encompassing strategy, we are just moving from one event to another, losing our very, very hard-worked years of investment in highly sophisticated capacities, again, allegedly, and using them to impress internally, externally, I don't know who, and to what end. And I'm really sad to say that in all of this disarray on the Hezbollah's side, if this thing won't change, the prices for Israel will just go higher and higher. And for the hostages in Gaza, the 1 year mark we're nearing the 1 year mark, and it's just a very, very saddening day.
An Israeli general once told me, a cluster of tactical achievements may yield a strategic outcome. Nevertheless, the Chinese under Sun Tzu, which I am more privy to in my understanding, highlighted that tactical achievements absent a strategy is the loudest path to defeat. I hope and pray that naturally this will not be the case when it comes to Israel and the United States and the West at large, because we do need a coherent strategy. We need leadership, and that is something that is unfortunately absent in too many states these days. But we're looking down south. We're hearing that the Ansar Allah, dominated by the Houthi tribes in Yemen, alongside Hashd al-Sha'bi with Kataib Hezbollah leading that voice, highlighting that in the event of a northern war or a southern war in Hezbollah's perspective, they will come to the aid of Hezbollah and will send hundreds of thousands of fighters and capabilities and yada, yada, yada. What are we to make out of that? And we don't have very much time for an elaborate response, so if you may keep it short, please.
I think the Houthis, with all due respect, by just looking at their parades in the streets of in Yemen, don't look like proficient warriors. They're more like Daesh type, ISIS type warriors, not well groomed in modern warfare. So by just sending people who are willing to fight, this is unlike the Radwan forces, who are trained in fighting and are rigidized military force to contend with. So other than propaganda machine, I really don't think the Houthis have much to offer as far as warring is concerned.
And with regard to Hashd al-Sha'bi, which is somewhat more potent than their Houthi counterparts?
Same. Any group of fighters who are not versed in an orderly battle, logistics, and the rest are just phalanges that are good for insurrection here and there, but not really for a war. So without really wanting to belittle their capabilities, our main enemy in the north is Hezbollah, and we should be focused on them rather than be detracted one way or another.
Indeed. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Sofrin, General Shafir, and General Rosen, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.